Pollution was affecting every city in America, and the most affected was Los Angeles.
There is a reason why the 70s era folks would not trade that decade for any other decade. They had a bike, a key to the house, and limitless freedom. Let's explore 25 things from the 70s kids today would never understand. Number 25. Fotomat. People take so many pictures today but never print any or have photo albums. The 70s was the era of delayed gratification. Textbook definition is the act of resisting an impulse in the hope of obtaining a more valued reward in the future. A relatable explanation is waiting to finish a roll of film, taking it to the store to get it developed, getting pictures back 2 weeks later. All this hassle with no editing whatsoever. Then Fotomat came and started making one-day photos. The kids in the 70s could never figure out how they processed all the pictures in there, and therefore concluded that they must have a giant underground facility in the parking lot. Number 24. Cyclable towel in public restrooms. While paper towel dispensers and air dryers existed, it was pretty common to see a cyclable towel in the public restrooms during the 1970s. This was a loop of fabric that somehow wound back through the machine it came out of. Some service would come out every so often and replace the things with clean ones. These became less and less common as time went on, as you never really know if someone had used that towel before you, nor what they had on their hands. It's documented in distant history that one person walked into a bathroom and was faced with a large, perfectly round, still glistening booger in the middle of the roll. He wiped his hands on his pants from that day forward till cyclable towels ceased to exist. These were super disgusting, and we want to meet the genius who thought that this was a good idea. Number 23. Wall-mounted rotary dial phone with a dialing wand. The rotary dial phone was once the be-all and end-all of the telephones. Like the cell phone of today, everybody had one, and they ruled domestic communications for decades. Grandmothers in 1970 had one of these things tied to a string and hanging next to their wall-mounted rotary dial phone. There was an old calendar, long out of date, on the wall with all the names and numbers of friends, families, businesses, and doctors written in the margins.
Dang it!
I would not want to work these things.
It's gonna take a long time.
And when you do pick up the phone, you put it to your ear. What are you listening for before you dial?
Bling, bling.
There was something very oddly satisfying about using a rotary phone. Not if you and all your friends had numbers starting with 799, some with lots of 7s, 8s, and 9s. Got pretty tiresome when someone's line was busy. Call waiting was introduced years later. After their widespread adoption in the early 1900s, the rotary dial phone was the de facto telephone the world over. They became part of everyday life and would even influence the English lexicon. Terms like dialing, which was still in common parlance today, can owe its existence to this venerable old technology, but their heyday wouldn't last forever. Number 22. Winding cassettes with a pencil. Today's kids will never know the real struggles from back in the day. This struggle is 100% real. The audio cassette was the first music format that truly championed portability. It was robust, compact, and let people take it on the go. It was later supplanted by the higher quality CD and then further digital technologies, but the format remains a nostalgic highlight for many. There should be a poll to see who spun the cassette versus those who twisted the pen versus those who tried to spin the cassette around like a noisemaker and their respective success ratios. Bic pen works significantly better than a pencil. The pencil shaft is too small and slips if you don't hold it at an extreme angle. Number 21. Station wagons. Dibs on sitting in the way back and waving at people in the car behind them. It kills us that hardly anyone makes station wagons anymore. Station wagons are better than SUVs by miles. Other highlights from back then were getting truckers to blast their horns, annoying people, drive-in movie theaters, and occasionally getting the bird from especially annoyed people. Over the next 20 years, emission standards for cars grew tighter, making large cars like station wagons and sedans less feasible.
Still, Lucas makes an important point about the size of a station wagon, some as much as 19 feet long and built for 6 to 9 passengers. We never appreciated the hauling capacity of a station wagon more than when we did not have it.
So in the 90s, the auto manufacturers ramped up the new category of SUV. It's legally built on a truck chassis, so it avoided the emission and efficiency regulations targeting passenger cars. Number 21. Typing class. Technology was advancing so fast in the 70s that having typing skills became a necessity basically overnight. Folks remembered how overwhelmed with different emotions one felt after walking into class with these keyboards on every desk. Some boomers type so hard that they destroy keyboards quickly, at over 100 words per minute, and it's attributed to typing classes in school on a mechanical typewriter. Number 20. Los Angeles smog. This was the air pollution in the 70s in Los Angeles. They used to have to issue smog warnings during the weather segments of the TV news when they expected stagnant winds and smog buildup. Those days, the sky would be completely gray, and you could actually taste and smell it in the air. Los Angeles had had years of thick air pollution due to a ballooning population, unregulated industry, a booming car industry, and its natural geography. In 1943, during World War II, pollution blanketed the city so intensely residents thought Japan had launched a chemical attack. Over the next 3 decades, improvements came, but they were slow. The Washington Post described it in 1953 as eye-burning, lung-stinging, headache-inducing smog. The biggest victory came against smog in 1970. President Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, which led to air pollution regulations and allowed California to make even stricter provisions within its state. Number 19, living without air conditioning. A lot of things stood out in the 70s. For one thing, people got up way earlier and did their work before it got hot. They kept a bucket, canteen, or other water source nearby and drank from it often. Most families were out in the country, so shade was plentiful. But even in cities, there were more trees and green spaces. You had windows that opened on all 4 sides of the house.
It's been a busy evening for Eric and Craig Roseberry trying to help homeowners make repairs to their air conditioning units. They say a lot of times people have trouble keeping their homes cool.
The windows were placed in each room so that you got a cross breeze. The house was oriented on the land so that it would catch the breeze. You had wide porches that were open to the breeze, shaded, and even had enough room for furniture. The kitchen was at the back of the house, away from the company rooms, and sometimes even detached from the house with a hallway. In older houses, ceilings were 12 feet tall to allow the heat to rise. Bedrooms were often on the 2nd floor to catch more breeze at night. We were a lot more creative with fans back then. You would set them up in windows to create airflow throughout the house, not just to cool off one spot or one room. Cotton and natural fabrics that breathe. No synthetics, no polyester, no 50-50 blends. Kids spent a lot of time outside, under the trees or on the porch, making ice cream, playing cards, catching lightning bugs in the evenings, and eating meals. Number 18, the Dewey Decimal System at the library. The Dewey Decimal System was created by Melville Dewey, and it was the first of its kind to be widely adopted by libraries all over the world. Melville Dewey was heavily influenced by the philosophy of Francis Bacon, who believed in organizing knowledge in a systematic manner. The success of the Dewey Decimal System can be attributed to a number of factors. First and foremost, it was simple and easy to use, which made it accessible to libraries of all sizes and budgets. Additionally, the system was highly adaptable and could easily be customized as new forms of knowledge were developed. Finally, the system became so widely adopted that it became the standard for organizing libraries, both in the United States and around the world. The widespread use of the system allowed for consistency in the organization of libraries, making it easier for patrons to find what they were looking for, no matter where they went. Number 17, using paper maps. Common Gen Z question is, why do boomers use paper maps when we have GPS? Well, why do people still read books with all the podcasts and digital media available? Our skills at navigating without electricity are polished by decades of actual experience. Such people who rely on GPS will be lost when the lights go out. E-paper maps don't run out of batteries or lose satellite signal.
For the same reason, this is what 2,000 miles looks like on a Mercator map, but so is this. It's the same distance, the fault is in the map.
Why would you not have a paper map handy just in case? The most important part of survival is to have these basic skills at hand, which work without any electricity, phone signals, internet, or satellites, which can leave you all completely lost and alone in any given situation without them. Number 16, Saturday morning cartoons. This Saturday's morning cartoon guide from the mid-70s. 9:30 has Scooby, Pink Panther, Porky, Mr. Rogers, and even Lone Ranger. What to choose? Electric Company at 9 and 11, and let's not forget Schoolhouse Rock. We can blame certain parents for this fun being ripped away from kids. I remember Saturday morning cartoons right up until the early 2000s when they started to disappear, and I didn't understand why. It was known for many years that parents lobbied to cancel them off network TV. Honestly speaking, we wouldn't take anything for our memories of those innocent days as a kid. A bowl of your favorite cereal and 3 hours of the best TV a kid could ever watch. Then it was dressed and straight out the door until you were forced to come back in. Then it was supper, bath, bed, wake up, and repeat. Even the summer break seemed to last longer. The 70s and 80s, what a time for a kid to be alive. Number 15, being out of communication before smartphones. This is going to be a boomer answer, but you were more in the moment. You recognized things going on around you. There were fewer distracted driving accidents. Strangers interacted with one another. Cell phones did not start becoming commonplace until the mid-90s, and even then, most people did not have them. Aside from being in the moment, you were not surrounded by people who were rampant with separation anxiety, something that phones and smartphones have caused to skyrocket in society in a major way. Now you have endless apps, endless companies, endless devices crowding around your peripheral spots, clamoring for your taps, clicks, looks, scrolls, likes, hearts, retweets, survey answers, feedback, and ratings. It is overwhelming to the brain, and you can see the overall form of humanity is sliding into a world where even what...
So Magdalena has also found a place to live in the old harbor power plant in Friedrichshain's Osthofen. The interior is very simple, which makes it feel very different from the colorful Renat on the other side of the street.
Watching a 10-second video was becoming too much. People carried a newspaper, magazine, or paperback to read on buses, airplanes, or even if you had to wait somewhere like a doctor's office. At home, they would play solitaire with cards, or build jigsaw puzzles, or perhaps plastic models of tech stuff. People joined clubs to socialize and practice hobbies. Hunting club, book club, auto club, card club, sewing club, movie appreciation club, and so on for almost any hobby. The challenge was finding such clubs, since you literally had to see a notice on a public bulletin board or hear about it by word of mouth. Number 14. Going somewhere by yourself as a kid. Trying to explain this to kids today is impossible. We'd go out with my little gang of girlfriends and stay out all day, riding bikes, hanging out at the beach, exploring the woods, reading comic books, sitting around braiding each other's hair and listening to music, practicing dances, and playing tag. You just came home when the streetlights came on. Summer vacations seemed like they would never end. Neighborhood kids met up to ride our bikes, play dodgeball, hide and seek, tag, softball, and just to hang out. The older kids helped the younger kids fend off the bullies. We don't remember feeling bored. We went to the town swimming pool nearly every day. Family vacations always included a few weeks by a lake in a provincial park. We climbed mountains, caught a ton of fish, went swimming and boating, and spent nearly every evening by a campfire. Life didn't feel as rushed. There was more time to read, meet up with friends, and enjoy family time. There were not as many of the tech distractions and time suckers we have today. We could also get comic books at gas stations and convenience stores. Many of those stores had a rack for cheap kids' toys, cap guns, candy cigarettes. The toy where you were dropping magnet shavings onto a guy's cartoon face to make funny hair was always available. Number 13. Super underwear. It's kind of surprising the company that made Underoos was able to get both a license from DC Comics and Marvel Comics, or at least have characters from both companies featured in the same commercial. They were special because other than that, it was all white cotton, at least for boys. There were not the colorful options and different cuts for boys back then. These were the best superhero costumes. They were so much better than Halloween costumes of the time, which were a plastic faceplate, and a trash bag with a hole for the head cut out and a picture of the character you were supposed to be on your chest. This lets you actually wear the costume of the character. And just to prove how relevant Underoos are, this is what Iron Man was calling Spider-Man in Civil War. Number 12. Getting prizes for sending in box tops of cereal. Let us unlock a few memories by sharing 2 pro tips. If you stand the box upright and shake it long enough, the prize will float to the top. Second one is you can wash these sticky toys with dish soap and water, and they'll stick like they're brand new. Another memory from the 70s is the assignments. In middle school, we had an assignment to write a letter to a business. Many kids wrote a letter to Kellogg's and told them how much they liked their cereals and the prizes in the box. They sent them back a nice form letter and a bunch of box prizes. Gifts like wacky wall walkers in addition to other treasure. The glow-in-the-dark skull shown here came in a box of Fruit Loops. Kids began a tradition of hiding skulls in one another's rooms. His glow-in-the-dark nature sometimes led to hilarious reveals before bedtime. Cereal brands have kept this tradition alive and well in 2024, but these pale in comparison to the real working submarines and other awesomeness we got in the 70s. Number 11. No Google or Amazon. If you wanted to learn something or order something, it was an arduous process involving driving, libraries, heavy encyclopedias, microfiche, stores, ads in magazines and comic books, waiting 6 to 8 weeks, etc. Teenagers were much more like mini adults. We remember that many of the slightly older teens had full-time jobs. It was nothing for them as sophomores and juniors in high school to jump in the car and go to a concert, stay out all night, come back the next morning. They never called to check in or say where they were spending the night. And they were nice kids with nice families. They were loved and cared for. It just never occurred to anyone that harm would come to them. When you're living in a golden age, you don't realize you're living in a golden age. You don't realize it until it ends. Every decade is like that. Nothing feels unusual at the time. It just feels like life. It's only when we look back at the 70s shirt collars and the beads and the huge belt buckles and the hair. Now we realize it was done to excess, but it didn't seem excessive at the time.
The curls, the chemicals, the dryer. It wasn't just a haircut.
Hardesty trades hard-to-manage straight hair for golden Greek.
Number 10. Rotary dial telephones. Imagine getting a call on a phone and it's Grandma, and she's been gone for 15 years. That sounds either like a sweet memory or like the start of a horror movie. So many will never understand. Long cords, laying on the floor talking, knowing your numbers, remembering a number, not losing the piece of paper you had it on, waiting for the phone to ring, making someone use the phone to end their call so someone could call you, calling long distance after 7 p.m. But on a serious note, we do have a very peculiar question. Why do all the pictures from the 70s look exactly the same? Our best guess is the pre-internet era. Before the internet, clothing, fashions, furnishings, and color schemes were all influenced from some central places like television or a few magazines. When the internet happened, everybody got into all sorts of subcultures, which is why it's very easy to tell the decade or era in a photo all the way up to about 1995, when the internet broke that paradigm. Enough about the Wi-Fi, back to rotation. These phones had a circular dial with holes for each number from 0 to 9. To call someone, you would put your finger in the hole for the first number, turn the dial to the right until it stopped, and then release it. The dial would spin back to its original position. You repeated this for each number in the phone number. These phones were often heavy and made from strong materials like metal or plastic. They were connected to the wall with a cord, so you couldn't move around while talking. The sound quality was good, but dialing took a bit of time compared to modern phones. Despite this, rotary dialing phones were very common and reliable, helping people stay connected with friends and family. Number 9. Nicotine stains on pretty much everything. Yes, everyone smoked back then. You could also smoke everywhere. Restaurants, airplanes, right in the hospitals. If you watch Jaws, there's a scene in the ER where the doctor is smoking as he's talking to the parents. There was not much education over the risks of smoking as it has now. Just a few decades ago, we started perceiving the dangers of smoking to not only lung health but overall, especially because now there are a lot of restrictions in advertising and companies are obliged to put the risks of smoking clearly on the package. If you look for TV commercials of cigarette brands at the time and the 70s, you get the cool vibe it was for the moment. So smoking was pretty normal, yet considered harmless and pretty much considered as being cool, just as betting for sports online is cool nowadays. When they smoked, the smoke had chemicals, including nicotine, which would stick to surfaces. This meant walls, ceilings, furniture, and even clothing turned yellow or brown. Homes often had a stale, smoky smell. The stains were sticky and hard to clean, making everything look dirty and old. It wasn't just inside houses. Cars, offices, and even public places like restaurants and airplanes were stained too. The nicotine stains made it clear someone smoked there, and it was a common sight in that era. People didn't realize how much smoking affected their environment and how hard it was to get rid of those stains. It took lots of scrubbing and repainting to make things look clean again.
You have to change your present lifestyle to something else in order to be successful in doing that.
For CNN, I'm Susan Hendricks.
Number 8. Magic fingers. The 70s were a strange time for beds. Water beds were super bonkers. What were people thinking? Magic fingers were in almost every motel up to about the Holiday Inn level, what today would be a 2-star or lower. The reason the brand fell into disuse included inflation. Quarters lost their values, and the manufacturer failed to modernize. These were regular beds that could shake or vibrate when you put a coin into a special box attached to them. The idea was to give guests a fun and relaxing experience. You'd insert a quarter, and the bed would start to gently shake and vibrate for about 15 minutes. People believed the vibrations could help them relax and fall asleep more easily. The magic fingers were especially popular with families and travelers looking for a little extra comfort or amusement. They were a quirky and memorable part of staying in motels during that time. While they were mostly a fun novelty, some people thought the vibrations could also ease muscle tension and provide a mini massage. Overall, magic fingers added a bit of magic and fun to 1970s travel. Number 7. Seeing someone who was very obese was a rarity. If you grew up in the 70s and early 80s, you were indoors all the time and the culture around snacking between meals was very different. No internet, no video games, and a limited selection of TV meant that you literally had no choice but to find ways to entertain yourself outside of the home. In the 1980s, food companies began to add chemicals to food to increase the person's appetite, delaying the feeling of satiation, making you eat more, and manipulating mouthfeel of foods. They literally add chemicals to make people eat more. The New York Times did a huge story on this a few years ago, where there was a convention of the food chemistry industry. and gave a huge amount of background and talked about all the effects. They made no mention about obesity in America or any moral implications of making people eat too much food. Number 6. No caller ID. The term landline still feels weird. That wasn't a thing until cell phones took over. It was just the phone. Cell phones went from rich people's toys you saw in movies to the norm in 5 years. Just thinking of a house phone ringing all obnoxiously and someone in the household answering it with no clue who may be on the other end seems so archaic now. In the 1970s, phones were very simple. They didn't have screens, and there was no way to see who was calling. When the phone rang, you just had to answer it to find out who it was. People didn't know if it was a friend, a family member, or a stranger at the other end of the line. Sometimes it was fun because every call was a surprise. But it could be annoying if you did get a lot of unwanted calls, like salespeople trying to sell you something. There was no way to block these calls either. You just had to answer and tell them you weren't interested. Overall, no caller ID meant you had to be brave and pick up the phone without knowing who was calling, which made talking on the phone a little bit more exciting and unpredictable.
You can make and receive calls. When someone calls your cell phone, this phone will ring. That's how you make an old rotary phone work with your cell phone.
Number 5. Credit card machines that used carbon paper. In the 1970s, credit card machines were quite different from today's sleek digital devices. Back then, they used a manual process with carbon paper to make transactions. Here's how it worked. A shopkeeper would place the customer's credit card on a flat metal plate. On top of the card, they'd put a slip of carbon paper and a receipt form. Then they'd slide a heavy, noisy handle over the stack, which pressed the card's raised numbers into the carbon paper. This action created an impression of the card details on the receipt. The shopkeeper kept one copy and the customer got another. There was no instant approvals or declines. Instead, the shopkeeper sent the receipts to the bank to process later. It was a slow and manual process, but it got the job done in a time before computers and digital transactions. Restaurants still keep these around for when the power goes out or their sales system goes down, typically referred to as a crash kit. However, a lot of credit and debit cards don't have raised numbers anymore, so the carbon copy does nothing. Number 4. Walkie-talkie to speak with friends down the street. You could talk to strangers who knew a ton of creative ways to swear and rant nonstop about stuff they didn't know anything about. Walkie-talkies were super cool gadgets that people used to talk to each other without wires. Imagine you have a magic radio that fits in your hand. You push a button, talk into it, and your friend can hear you, even if they're far away. Back then, walkie-talkies were bigger and clunkier than today's models. They had long antennas sticking out, which helped send the voice signals. These devices were often used by police officers, fighter fighters, and kids playing pretend games like cops and robbers. Walkie-talkies in the 1970s were pretty powerful for their time. They worked on batteries and had a few channels so you could switch and find a clear one to chat on. They made adventure and communication much more exciting and fun for everyone. Number 3. Car phones. Car phones were basically mobile phones. The issue was that originally they needed a car battery to power them, so it was just easier to have them in a car. Basically, it was a radio connection to a dispatch center that would patch it into the phone system. It had a very limited range, generally just within a city or part of a city. Typically, the person would talk to a radio operator who would connect the call. The car phone started out as World War II radio sets. The Army had made radios that could be hooked up to phone lines, allowing a field unit talking on a radio to be patched through to headquarters for efficient communication. After the war, this same technology was made available to civilians. Phone operators would get radios installed that they could patch through with their plug cord to connect with the rest of the phone system. People would then get radios installed in their cars, similar to modern walkie-talkies they could use to communicate with the operators and then make outgoing phone calls. There were improvements to the system over time, but it would still be recognizable to anyone working with standard VHF radios today.
You want to go to Bluetooth and ensure that Bluetooth is switched on. Then you press this button to press OK.
Number 2. Pet rocks. You may have heard the story of the pet rock. The Mexican beach stone that could be purchased in bulk for less than a penny, retailed for $3.95, and made inventor Gary Dahl $1 million during a kind of novelty gift hysteria in late 1975. What people today overlook is that the pet rock came with an instruction manual that was amusing. It was a very creatively packaged book, not just a rock in a box. This isn't half the story. We think the best part about this craze was some guy that started a pet rock cemetery. He would charge people to bury their pet rocks when they died. Number 1. Going to the airport, walk right in just to sit and watch planes. Your friends and relatives could come up to the gate with you to see you off or meet you, since there was no security. A few people brought carry-on bags other than women's handbags, since checked luggage was free and suitcases were usually too big to put in the overhead bins. Airports did not have the hundreds of shops and restaurants all over the place like they do now, except for maybe a coffee shop with those with long stopovers and a magazine shop. And everyone smoked then. The air was always filled with smoke anywhere people were waiting for any length of time. Seats had ashtrays built in the armrests, in the terminal, and in the airplane. These were some of the trends of the 70s kids today would never understand. If we missed something you encountered, just let us know in the comments section below.